The only way that the people I was with could get me to shut up was to say, no, no, sweetie, no, no. It's a successful act of bioterrorism. This is the best movie ever. But you have to avoid that. You think you're inventing an exotic particle. You didn't research your physics far enough. Your particle has already been disproven. And now anyone who is a science nut is going to rip your book to pieces.
There's Hugo and Nebula winning stories that now are not remotely accurate. Like Joe Haldeman's The Forever War. I got a chance to be at a conference with him, and he was laughing about it. He wrote this pivotal, seminal work of science fiction, and he's like, yeah, I got all that wrong. We didn't have the math back then. You know, it's like, it's effing Joe Haldeman, okay? He's the grandfather, the grand figure of science fiction. He gets stuff wrong. I suggest tell a good story or throw in the towel and just go into research.
One of the things that he did though, I mean, you can use existing particles and maybe twist that a little bit. Like it's funny you said. I mean, I was just thinking of they had tachyon rockets, you know, which were they had harnessed the tachyons, and I remember that they were using them. It was the warhead and the exhaust. Many of these things would be basically faster than light missiles, and they would they were on like a relatively small field of combat, and they were shooting these tachyon rockets back and forth at each other. I buy it. I'll buy a tachyon rocket.
Oh yeah.
So you don't have to necessarily make up particles. I mean, there's all kinds of really interesting stuff being done in subatomic particles. Maybe you can find one. And again, give it like that half twist so it's plausible but outlandish.
As long as you make it consistent. The trick to all of what we do is, if you're going to establish exotic science and make up your own science in order to tell the story, you have to keep that consistent. You can't suddenly change it down the road. The reader, by and large, could really give a crap whether you got it right or not. For the most part.
Except for you.
But if you then change the structure that you have set up, they go. They will throw the book away and be done with it.
Internal consistency matters more than anything else in the world.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So who stands up? Like, who stood the test of time? Like, can you think of an example of an author who was that level of prophetic, who really has stood up? Like, as science has evolved, who's
the stand remains remarkably solid in terms of the virology. It's relatively glancing. I mean, King did not do a huge amount of research, but what he did, he made sure to get very, very right. And you could wipe out mankind with Captain Trips, which is why I'm not allowed to have a genetics lab.
I think I'm not a real hard SF reader, because going back to what we talked about earlier, which is when I read it, I'm like, these characters are just window dressing, and I don't care what happens to them. So I've fallen off the wagon on that quite a bit. But Asimov has come up with tons and tons of stuff that has impacted our whole world. So I think he's stood the test of time.
Neil Stephenson.
That goes back to what Judith's talking about. Neil Stephenson, what was the book where he predicted avatars and the internet? Snow Crash.
Yeah.
Snow Crash is great. You read Snow Crash, and there's parts where you're like, wow, this guy predicted Second Life and the internet and all this cool stuff. This is genius. And now his character's in a car accident because he's returning a video cassette to the store. There's stuff like that where you're like, it's just you can't get it all right.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, one trap with the more intensively you research and the more you kind of show the results of your research, the less forgiving the reader who has specific knowledge in any area becomes. Mine is usually guns. If you just casually reference, shooting a pistol, that's fine. But if you start talking specifically about, my character's a gun expert and he's trained on this, and then you mention the safety on a Glock, which doesn't exist, I pretty much throw the book across the room. So how do you navigate that?
For me, it took getting my nose bloodied a few times. Yeah. You see things on TV. You're like, oh, I've seen guns go click, 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 click. You're like, no, the slide lock's open on that particular gun, and now you look like an idiot. My fans email me and say, you're an idiot.
Yes.
Oh, I think I need to get a consultant in here to read all my stuff to make sure it's right. Yeah. And again, I don't think the readers care if it's 100% accurate, but you got to show you put in the wrench time to at least get it in the ballpark.
I do consultants, and I also try to avoid ever actually writing as a point of view character for anything longer than 19 pages, someone who is an expert. If you're in the middle of a viral apocalypse and it's the three of us, well, we can go, you should probably wash your hands. And then wash them again and don't lick me. But if I have a virologist as my main character, I'm going to start getting things wrong. So I do the research, and then I'm the expert. The characters are characters. They're people in my pressure cooker. The danger is saying, oh, my character is a gun expert, because now you've laid out a challenge to the actual gun experts that are reading. You also have to remember some people are always going to be looking for you to slip up. You know, there are people who want you to be an idiot, so they'll call you on being an idiot even when you're not one. And you just kind of learn to take that. You know, I got somebody who emailed me and told me I'd never touched a gun in my life, and they could tell. And I sent them a picture of my NRA membership card and said, "Really?" And then they didn't email me anymore.
You know, I don't. You can never get everything right, especially when you're trying to write like these sweeping epic end of the world thrillers. There's too much to do. But you talk about like professionals and consultants, people that will check the stuff. And starting out, I never realized that you could just call like the police and ask them a couple of police procedural questions, and they're even happy to answer that. Or again, like these biotech guys. I mean, the nanotech stuff. I started contacting nanotech people, after the first book was out. Should have done that before the first book, but I didn't even realize. So I was trying to do my own research and absorb and learn as much as I could. And then as the further I got my feet wet in the game, I realized again these people are so excited about what they're learning, and again the chance to get away from the desk and the computer and talk about melting somebody's face. I mean, they're dying. They're like, dude, come on down and we'll buy you lunch and we can talk all for all afternoon about nanotech. And then you have them then you have them vetted. They don't have to read the whole book. I'll say like, look, here's 700 words. Could you vet this for me?
Yeah, I do that a lot with my consultants. If they're very busy people, I'll block out the parts. I'm like, okay, this is an ex-Special Forces guy, so here are the prioritize, read these pages. If you have time, read the whole thing. And then I know I'm doing it right if they go, I read the whole thing from beginning to end. I couldn't put it down. I'm like, sweet. But it's really just you can't know everything, and you also aren't going to be an expert in everything, so try and get experts to give you as much info as you can get. Yes, sir.
On a related note, you were mentioning world building and how you actually loved putting worlds together. Has there ever been a time where you've had two different aspects of the world that seem to collide and you're pretty sure somebody's going to notice and it's going to collapse horribly, but you managed to pull it off and save it?
I've already thrown in the towel on that completely. I have fans now that read my stuff. Like, they're the last people to read it because certain people have bubbled to the top that just have this photographic memory of everything. And I will send a 600-page manuscript to these particular fans. They'll read through and they'll email me, you got this wrong, you got this wrong. Consistency of world building. And then I'll have to go back through and fix it. But yes, sometimes you have to retcon. You have to go back and revise your stuff and go, well, I know I told you this, but it really works like this in order for there to be consistency and people to buy in. Sometimes you just can't avoid it. Especially if I'm now on my 8th book that's in this shared world. And they're all big books, and you just don't remember everything. I don't. How about you? Do you ever clash in with yourself?
Obsessive compulsive disorder and typing 120 words a minute means never having to say you're sorry. More seriously, though, I have a squadron of people that reread everything, and I'm a jigsaw writer. There are actually indications in my first book as to what happens in the 8th book. And consequentially, I have had to be so precise and so careful that everything fits together that I've managed to avoid that so far. And that it's really important to me now that I maintain that because people have learned that I don't make mistakes, and that means I can't make mistakes because they will be so unforgiving, you'll never find my body. So it's extreme care on my part and occasional panic. I had one error make it into an arc of one of my books and actually called my publisher sobbing hysterically at like 6 in the morning at her house going, we have to fix it, it's on page 189, paragraph 4. And she's like, okay, honey, can you call me at work hours? At the office, maybe? Calm down, take your meds, go away.
Do you ever run into this? Do you get conflicts in your timelines, in your world?
You know what? I think OCD can be a good thing. I usually have it worked out pretty carefully going through, especially though when you're writing, again, like the big epic. I mean, it's the whole world. You've blown up the whole world. There's so many loose ends, and you can never touch on all of them. And just coming back to the Plague Year trilogy, I've blown up, the whole world. There are no warm-blooded life forms below 10,000 feet. And in the subsequent books of the series, I started to play more with, well, what does that mean? I mean, in the first book, we didn't even touch on some of that because there was just too much material. And then the more I learned about this and the more I studied, just what's insects, etymology.
Etymology?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
That's a big word. And I was like, ooh, now I could do some fun things, with the bugs. I mean, there's hints of it. And then I thought, oh, cool, I can get a whole couple nice big scary scenes out of this.
Right.
And so there's a reason why, there's a little more of this angle in one book than in the other. And it's me kind of shifting around and fudging a little bit.
So if your nanotech melts everything warm-blooded below 10,000 feet, what happened to the naked mole rats?
Well, it depends on how warm they get.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I started talking about, when you have your cold-blooded lizards that are basking in the sun, if they get too warm, the nanobots will activate and take them apart too. Same thing with insects. If your bumblebee stops, it dry itself out and manages to absorb enough heat. Well, anything that's organic carbon these are going to take it apart. And again, it just barely touches on this stuff in the first book. And then I learn more, and I just learn more of the process. And again, trying to tie up all my loose ends. But I get a lot of emails, mostly from military, especially Navy guys that are pissed that the Pacific Fleet they're like, what happened to the Pacific Fleet? They would be fine in their ships. We have biological containment protocols. I'm like, dude, you haven't been resupplied for 11 months when the book opens. I'm like, I don't know, man.
You're not happy anymore.
You're not. Yeah, maybe for 3 or 4 months, and and it's kind of fun. You get to kind of bicker gently with them. I'm like, oh yeah, in your face, Navy guy.
Yes, sir.
So I think in successful literature, like apocalyptic literature, you're maybe playing on people's fears, or science fiction literature, the hopes and dreams of people and where we can go as a species. How do you feel that maybe the success of your sales or the reception from the public depends on people's worldview at the time? In a particularly grim era, are people more interested in this sort of work?